welcome to the Startup Grind.
So those of you who don't know, Convoy has done some amazing things over the last 14 months. Very young company, but they've raised a few $1 million and actually started to make some headway. So we have the CEO tonight of Convoy. So without any further time and ado, I'm going to welcome to the stage Dan Lewis from Convoy. Come on up, Dan.
Always great.
Thank you. All right, is this on or should I use this?
No, but you're actually using both.
All right.
We do one for make sure that we don't miss anything.
That sounds good. Hi.
So again, for those of you who have not been to a Startup Grind event, which many of you have not, this is really just a fireside chat. It really is a conversation just between Dan and I. So if you need to get up to go to the restroom or get a glass of wine, feel free to do that. You're not going to interrupt us whatsoever. We'll take questions, sometime in the next 40 minutes or so. So feel free to ask questions. We'll have time for that. And, hopefully we'll get out of here a few minutes after 8 and get you on your way. So sit back, relax, enjoy yourself, and listen and learn. So Dan, thanks for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me up here.
Yeah.
I like the fire. It's really
It's nice, isn't it?
It's warm.
Yeah. Yeah. I was the first chapter. That's
bigger than I expected.
Yeah, I was the first chapter to get a fireside or a fireplace by the chair, so it works well. Well, let's just start off with the basic stuff people can look up on the internet. I'm not going to ask you stuff like that kind of things, but tell us, 14 months is long ago. 14 months is like that, right? It's done, right? And tell us kind of the steps you went through to just kind of get the ball started. And you can be kind of long-winded if you have to, but what steps did you take to kind of get from idea stage, which is, hey, I got this idea, I know I've vetted it, some customers said, hey, this, I think I would use this, it makes some sense. And then getting to okay, I gotta hire people, I've got to start the ball rolling. Tell us kind of some steps you took to get there.
Yeah, absolutely. So people who know me for a long time know that I've, considered starting different companies a lot of different times. And I was at Amazon before I started Convoy. And I remember going to my boss and I was like, I'm gonna go be a CEO and start a company. And she was like, you're crazy. It's the hardest job in the world. Why would you want to do that? And honestly, a big part of it for me was I just knew that's where I got my energy and passion. I wanted to build things. So I didn't actually I had a bunch of ideas I'd been noodling on for maybe 6 months before I left Amazon. But I didn't have the idea solidified. And one of my, kind of a friend of mine, a guy who started a company called Wavy back in the day and sold to Google. I was doing that with him. He was like, yeah, the number one thing you need to know if you're ever trying to start a company is you just have to quit your job. You can't do it on the side of your desk. It'll never actually happen. You'll never get the traction and nobody will invest in you. And so, we went back and forth on a couple ideas early, and then I actually, in February, a couple months before we actually founded Convoy, or at that point it was called GrayPoint. It was like a fake name we came up with just to open a bank account. We didn't have Convoy yet. I quit Amazon, and I had 2 different ideas. One was related to retail, kind of mobile retail, based on some of the things I'd learned at Amazon and some other things. And the other one was in trucking and in logistics. And the motivation for that came from my background's actually a lot of it's in technology and some in retail. And I'd done a bunch of work in supply chain as well. Some work for the Panama Canal, actually. I went to Spain and did some work getting an airline off the ground with parts and maintenance and their supply chain, similar things with United Airlines in the US, and some work with Boeing. And so had that visibility, and one of the earliest investors that I had been working with as a mentor, Hadi Partovi, had said, you should keep looking at that logistics and trucking thing. So when I quit Amazon, I had these 2 ideas, and I honestly just went, I went guerrilla. I just started talking to people. That's all I knew how to do. I was like, I have a wife, I have 2 kids. My wife's at home with the kids. I was like, I'm not gonna go, I'm taking a big risk here. I'm just gonna jump out of my job. I'm gonna go for it. But how do I minimize the length of time I'm gonna go between doing that and being able to go raise money? And I realized it really came down to, how do I validate the idea as fast as possible so that I can have a really credible story, How do I validate the idea so that I can go to the investors or the engineers that I know? I'm not a software engineer myself. My co-founder is, but go to and go and get engineers working for us. How do you get to there as fast as possible? And so that was just honestly walking into warehouses. I went on LinkedIn and looked up every single person in the trucking industry and cold in-mailed them. Sure. And then they would talk to me and they'd introduce me to 3 other people. Kept doing that. Got kicked out of the Whole Foods warehouse down in Soto. They just buzzed me in. I was like, all right. So I started walking around. I went to truck stops up in Marysville, some down south, and just hung out. It was super awkward at first. But I was like, I'm just going to walk up to truckers that are walking between their truck and the diner and be like, how do you like your life? What do you like? What do you not like? Because at that point, I didn't know. I knew trucking was a massive industry. It's about $800 billion spent on trucking transportation just in the United States per year for commercial trucking. But there are so many areas, right? You could build maps for drivers. You could build like a software to help them price. All these different things you could build. So it was just about grinding it out, honestly, getting my hands dirty. And I spent 6 weeks just completely in full research mode, both in that and the retail one. For the retail one, it was actually targeted to college students. So I went and bought a bunch of Starbucks $5 gift cards, got a clipboard, printed a questionnaire, put on a shirt that didn't make me look sketchy, and then went to a bunch of community colleges and just interviewed tons of students, and just did the same thing about how do you shop? Show me your phone. How do you shop on your phone? Walk me through the apps you use, and just kept doing that. So honestly, the steps I took to get going were just start doing it and start meeting everybody that I needed to know to form that concept and idea, so that when I went to investors, I could say, look, I just spent 6 weeks talking to 100 people. Here are all the stories. Here's what I learned.
Here's what I learned. Here's what they told me to do.
Really helped. It changed the entire conversation from I have an idea to every time there was a question I could pull an anecdote. I didn't have data yet, but I had anecdotes. And that changed all of the fundraising conversations. And then then in April, we really committed to the idea. Had a few engineers we'd been working with, actually, and we went and started pitching it. Put together our deck and started going in. Hadi Partovi and his brother Ali Partovi were our first investors.
Sure.
Fantastic.
So so that's not a bad thing.
No, they're great.
Yeah, all that's what I'm saying. It's like, you get those 2 guys. You can probably get a couple entries into other places.
That's right. So, that certainly helped, and give them a lot of credit for that. But it was that, and then it was the fact that it was an idea that was really compelling. And I've had a lot of ideas. My wife's had to hear probably dozens of ideas over the years. Like, what do you think of this one? Usually they start out, and some of their friends of mine are here. They start out, sounding really good in my head.
Sure.
And then by the 7th conversation,
it's horrible.
I'm like, guess that wasn't a good idea.
Yeah.
This is one where by the 7th conversation, I was like, wow, it's actually better than I thought. And then it just kept getting better. And maybe I can give a little bit of context about, specifically what it is in a second. But really, it just was guerrilla research that got me to the point that investors would really want to have that conversation. And that's how someone like Hadi has a lot of opportunities where he can invest, and demonstrating the level of commitment and passion to quit your job and I just spend 6 weeks in the trenches, accelerating the process and getting that data to have that conversation is what gets people excited, I think, about putting money behind somebody, because they know they're going to go do it.
Yeah, exactly. You've already experienced that. I think that one of the things that when I talk to entrepreneurs, younger entrepreneurs, is they talk to two of their friends and they think that's a great idea. At that point, instead of going to the next level of talking to 100 strangers, because the thing is, you shouldn't talk to your friends. You should talk to people that don't know you, because friends will lie to you to be nice to you. So friends are bad customer validation. Don't talk to your friends. Talk to your non-friends.
And those people I talked to early on became customers later. Yeah. Which is great. Yeah. So because then you can go back to them and say, hey man, you were so helpful to me.
Exactly.
Thank you so much for your help. Why don't I show you what we actually built?
Yeah.
Oh, it works. Cool. And then it's an easier sell than actually trying to sell them.
Yeah. Because hey, the crazy guy that came up to me in the truck stop.
Yeah.
Exactly. So, what did you want to be when you were growing up?
That's really funny. I think I knew I didn't want to be a doctor.
So you're going to the other side, here's what I don't want to do.
I know, he's at UW Medicine, so he's going to be a doctor. I just remember that growing up. I was like, you know what, a lot of things I want to do. And I always hear people saying, I want to be a doctor or something. And I was like, I just don't want to be a doctor. I don't know why. It was like the one thing I remember from childhood was I didn't want to be a doctor when I grew up. And I was pretty sure I wanted to either be a teacher, actually. When I was graduating from college, the two things I was most interested in were becoming a Spanish teacher. I'd lived in Chile for a year, ended up working in Spain and Mexico and Panama for a little while after that. But so I either was going to be a teacher or I was going to get into business and go try to solve problems and build things in business. And so I ended up taking that path initially. Maybe I'll go back to teaching at some point. But those are the two things that I think I probably want to do.
When you get older.
Yeah.
What do you do? Like, what do you do for fun?
I bought my 5 and 7-year-old daughters walkie-talkies, which they got yesterday.
Sure.
So we played walkie-talkies last night. That was fun. So I guess, honestly, I spent a lot of time playing with my kids. I took them, I literally bought a raft, pumped it up, and went down rapids up in the Skycomish River last weekend with them. So they trusted me to do that. And just getting outside and playing with my kids and then building Convoy. Those are the fun things I spend, and my family and my wife, pretty much where I spend my time.
Is there such a thing as work-life balance? In a startup, in your position? Do you think you're doing a good job of that?
I mean...
I should ask you why.
I think I think it's really hard. So one thing I've realized, and that she was probably pointing out before I did, is I've worked at a bunch of other companies that had, where I worked really hard. And I think just personally, I always work really hard. So that's just how I've been. But I've worked in, everything from, other startups to services businesses like management consulting to larger technology companies. And all of them, I felt like I put in similar amounts of time, at least for the majority of the time.
Yeah.
But the mental commitment to it and the position in terms of, especially being, I think, a CEO and a founder is, I'm never not thinking. It's really hard to not think about it, right? So that's why it's great to have the distractions and like the focus of the other activities and kids and family and sort of go into that world, but it's hard to just to let it go. So I think you have to find that balance in terms of just time, and the hardest, it's not really about time, it's about the attention. How do you not attend to that when you're not at work, right?
Yeah.
Mentally processing things. Like how do you actually let that go and then just focus on other things? So that's probably the harder part.
So how'd you make that transition from being a non-CEO? Because this is the first time you're a real CEO, right? So...
Was I a fake CEO before?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. No, you weren't. I'm saying you weren't a CEO before. So
I've never been a CEO before.
Yeah, so now you're a real CEO. So what was that transition like? Was there anything like you like, holy crap, I just didn't expect this, or... Was there something that was a surprise?
I didn't know what it was going to be like, and I couldn't have predicted it before I did it, probably. And I think that it's also because it's gone so fast. Like I wasn't like I've been a CEO of a company that has gone from 0 to 45 people or so, and we've raised about $19 million in just about a year.
Exactly. So, which is really quite fast.
It's been really fast. So I think that I didn't know what that would be like going into it, and I couldn't have predicted it. It actually made me think at one point, I was like, I don't think humans are very good at empathy. I don't think you can actually understand what someone's really going through until you do it yourself, like in any category. And when I had kids the first time, I was like, okay, I never could have expected what that was like.
Sure.
And then doing this, like, couldn't have predicted that. So I just kind of come to the conclusion now that you can't actually predict things. You don't know what they feel like till you do them. Yeah. This is certainly in that category.
Yeah, it's not like you can, it's just like this.
It's really hard. There's no analogy that makes sense.
Yeah. You went to Yale, right? Did you pick
Yes.
Yale, or did Yale pick you, or why Yale, or why Yale?
Interesting. This is going way back now. So there were two things. One is I actually applied to 10 colleges. I was really into film. I thought film would be really kind of cool to go get into. I actually worked for I was the assistant to the director of the film department at Yale for a while.
Oh, that's cool.
Was part of the production team there. Studied that for a while. I think one of the reasons was it was a school that had a film department. That was like a checklist for me when I was going down. And then I went to Inglemoor High School. So I actually went to a public high school on the east side over in Kenmore. And I knew I had heard of some of the Ivy League schools, and knew it was going to be a great opportunity. It wasn't something I was kind of inundated with growing up. It's pretty far away. It wasn't a big part of my life or thinking. I wasn't planning for that. I did some things really successfully in high school that kind of set me up to have a lot of options for college. And then I had a great mentor and a teacher who literally took me aside when I told him that I got in there and I was thinking about going to a bunch of other places. He was just like, Dan, like, you don't know this, but you should really go there. And then, my parents were like, well, you need to make the decision, because they've always been really much about, they've always been really focused on just encouraging me to think about things and then make the right decision.
Yeah.
And so I was evaluating a lot of things, and this teacher was like, no, you should just go there. Like, what are you doing?
Yeah. There is no decision here.
And because the opportunity was really, really significant going there and just having that exposure.
Sure.
And it was great. I think I probably would have had a very similar life and very similar outlook no matter where I went to college, anywhere. But I think it did give me some, it pushed me pretty hard, and it made me aspire.
Yeah. And why, I mean, you jumped from, I think you went into consulting, right? Consulting fairly early on? Right?
Hold on. I don't want to spill that. Yes, I went to consulting.
Yeah. And was that by design, or is like, hey, I just need to do something because I don't know really what I want to do yet? Or
I like business. Like in high school, I competed nationally, and I think I won the state a couple times in DECA, which is like a business competition.
Sure.
Really like that. My dad worked for small business. I worked for the small business growing up. His father had started that in Seattle. And so that actually involved doing deliveries as well with a big van. So I kind of got some exposure to bills of lading and trucking and packing and delivery routes. And so I think that just doing, getting into business and thinking about building a company and how to make companies successful was something that I was really interested in. And then I also really liked the idea of teaching and coaching. I thought that was kind of something I enjoyed doing. So those are the two things. And I'll be really honest, I didn't know which one to do. It wasn't like an obvious decision for me. I think you kind of look, at that time in my life, I was 22, I just go back from Chile. I lived in Chile for a year, came back to the US, like, should I go teach Spanish or should I go into business? And it was 2003, so the economy kind of sucked coming out of the first tech bubble bursting. Yeah. And I had a dean at Yale, and he basically said, look, let me teach you this thing called option value. And he basically said, if you go do management consulting right now, you can have, the odds of you being able to go be a teacher later are really high. Yeah. If you go do teaching right now, the odds of being able to go into management consulting later are really low. So if you're not sure which one you want to do, pick the one that has more option value. So that was actually probably that was probably the decision point there. I was like, that makes a lot of sense. I'll go do that.
Exactly.
And then, I really enjoyed it. So.
Sure. Brother, family, what's your family? Brothers, sisters?
I have a pretty big family, actually. I have 3 brothers and 1 sister.
So which is the oldest brother?
Me.
Okay. Who's your second oldest? Who's the second oldest?
My second oldest is a guy named John.
John. So if I call John right now.
That's how I interview people.
What's that?
That's how I interview people. I was like, who's your boss? So if I call Mike right now.
Exactly. So if I called John right now and asked him what your best trait is, what would he tell me?
Wow.
This is John, not you.
I think he would say that I work like I'm really passionate about what I want to do. Like when I focus on it, I will put a lot of time and energy and just everything into it. Maybe to a fault sometimes, but I think that's probably what he would observe.
How has that served you in growing Convoy?
Effort underlines everything you do. Like everybody says, grow hard, go smart, whatever, but it all has to do with effort. And at this phase of a company, the reason we went fast wasn't just because that was the easiest path. It was because if we didn't go fast, it increased the risk for our business in 2 ways. One is the market. Back in 2015, there was a lot of speculation that the funding market would dry up or change dramatically in 2016.
Sure.
Right? And so I kind of had a work back plan to, hey, we're starting this thing in April. How do we raise our seed round and then get to a point where we can demonstrate? We were pretty convinced early on that this was more of a when this will happen business than an if this will happen business. Yeah. And so it was, how do we get to a significant funding round that gives us a chance to accelerate this business as fast as possible, and what do we have to do to get there? Yeah. And so we created a work back plan that involved us getting to the point we could go credibly get a Series A done in 2015 with basically 8 months from founding the company. And so that was effort. because there was a lot of things that we had to do smart, we had to be clever and thoughtful about what we did, but at the end of the day, we had to put in time and energy to get there.
Yeah.
And
How do you think that's affected the culture of the company?
I think achieving that really validated the whole idea of, let's set goals and go achieve them. And I think we have I think the culture is great. I think people are bought in, people are excited about it.
Wait a minute, you think the culture's great? Wow.
I know. Shocked, right?
It's shocking. Grant, is the culture great?
It is.
Yeah, okay. He thinks so too.
Grant thinks so?
Yeah.
All right. Yeah, I mean, look, setting goals and hitting goals, that is something that is really important for people just being excited about it. Like, just want to have fun we have fun. We have a great time in our company. We're a pretty hardcore operations. There's a lot of operations to the business.
Yeah.
There's trucks are running every day. There's a lot of things to pay attention to.
Yeah.
So, it's kind of there's a lot of a grind just with the operations, and then just, enjoying people you're working with is super important for that. But setting goals and achieving goals is the best way to build. That's one of the components, I think, of a culture that's really healthy, is people can kind of feel like they're pushing in the same direction and going in the same direction. And it's one thing to say a mission, and that becomes this ambiguous mission that's going to happen 3 or 4 years from now. It's the other thing to set a goal.
And do it.
I was like, look, we're in trucking. We were new. Like, we need 100 shipments by this date. We didn't have a product. Like, we need to get 100 shipments at least so we can understand our business enough to go have a really credible story about how to take it to the next level.
Yeah.
And so that was a pretty defining goal, and we did that, and we got it, and that's kind of what led to that Series A.
Yeah, yeah. So I mean, that really creates and when you hire people, whether you say it or not, it already is. It's already inbred into the system, right? Like, hey, we accomplished goals here. You just don't necessarily have to come out of your mouth to say that. Right?
That's right. Yeah.
I ask this question to every single guest. How did you earn your first dollar that wasn't from a relative? So it's not like working for Uncle Joe.
No. I think probably when I was about 10, maybe earlier than that, because I used to set up candy shacks in my back porch where I'd have like a little cardboard shack and I'd sell candy that I'd buy at the grocery store and sell to my neighborhood kids.
Really?
But my sister let me substitute on her paper route.
Oh, there you go.
I was like, whenever she would stick or was gone, I'd be like, yes, I can make some money. So I go do her paper route. Yeah, and then I mowed lawns, did paper route, pick weeds.
Sure. Yeah.
I always wanted to buy baseball cards growing up, and it was like $10 for a box set or something it cost, or like whatever the big store was back then. So I think my friends and I would, kind of get up on Saturday morning and be like, how are we going to make $10 this weekend? So we would basically go to every neighbor within 5 blocks and it's like, can we do any work for you? And I think they just felt bad for us. They'd like, pick some weeds. Here's a quarter. And if we wash your car, and I don't even know if we did a good job. People let us wash their cars when we were little.
Yeah.
So I remember I worked like an entire day once, and I was so tired at the end of it. And this person that we were working for came out, and I was expecting, I don't know, at that point, I'm like, I'm gonna get $2 or $3, maybe $5. I worked like so long. And she was like, here's a quarter and a bag of marshmallows. And I was like, oh. I was like, I don't know what to say. I'm like, thank you.
Yeah,
That's
exactly
what I wanted.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Can I have more marshmallows? So you were at Amazon for a few years, 2.5 years or so. How has that affected how you run your company? Is it do you use the 2 pizza rule? What's the things that you take from Amazon that happens right now inside of Convoy?
Team structure is part of it, but I don't know if that was just because of the experience at Amazon. One is values. One thing that Amazon, I think, does really well is they have a set of company values that they live day in, day out.
Yeah.
So, I had different experiences in each of these companies, so that could have impacted this as well.
Sure.
But I worked at Microsoft and I worked at Google as well. And in neither case did I feel like the company's values were sort of lived day to day in everything we did. Whereas at Amazon, there's a set of values, and when you're being hired, when you're interviewing somebody, when you're reviewing something, when I'm having a conversation in a meeting, it becomes this common language that the company uses to give feedback. And it's actually really empowering for people in a company when they want to speak up and push back, to have a set of company values they can pull from and use that language to push back. It's empowering, right? Like I'm pulling from this value and I'm challenging you on this based on the company value. So what we did, actually asked, so Jeff Bezos is one of our investors, and I kind of asked him when they created the company values. And I think he said it was around like 90 or 100 people or something like that. I can't remember the exact time, but the advice he gave, which I thought was really smart, was we didn't just go set the values. The company developed, and then we saw what was working, right? And then we thought about, okay, what's working? Now let's capture those and encapsulate those values into a set of things that we actually live by. Mm-hmm. And so we waited a little while, kind of towards about the year mark, we started working on our values. And we looked back and said, what made us successful as a business? And now we're close to being kind of having those wrapped up. We already brought them to the team a couple times, and we want them to kind of represent who we are. And we want to live by them and use them as in our company day-to-day conversations. Yeah. So I think values is a huge part of what I took from Amazon. The second one was just transparency. One thing Amazon does that I think is really smart is, there's time for this to work and time where maybe it wouldn't work, is they don't do PowerPoints, right? It's a Word document. So you walk in, it's the 6-pager, you write a document, you walk in, everybody reads it in silence before the meeting starts, and then you discuss it after that. So you might walk into a 1-hour meeting and talk and read for 30 minutes, and everybody marks it up, and then you have a conversation for the next 30 minutes about the document. And another thing that Amazon does, and I'll talk about this as transparency, is the goals that a lot of individual teams have, maybe a 10-person team or a 20-person team has, roll all the way up to the top. They don't get aggregated. So it's not like the CEO has 20 goals that he cares about. He's reading like 500 goals and tracking them and measuring against them, which means that each team, there's transparency all the way up and down, and there's accountability. And the Word document also is really about a transparency accountability, because you can't mask things in a Word document. Yeah. You can mask things in a PowerPoint. You can mask things in a presentation. You can't mask them in a Word document. So really at least from my experience, was this sort of open, transparent culture where it was based on merit and what you did, much harder to mask. And I don't know, those things really resonated with me. I was like, wow, that's impressive to me that they've developed these things that allow you to have this kind of straightforward discussion, and that the senior leadership wants to see and track hundreds of goals across the company. So each individual team feels like, I have a lot of responsibility to do this, because the SVPs or the CEO is going to see this goal. Yeah. And at Microsoft, for example, I had great experience at Microsoft as well, but I remember a lot of the goals were aggregated. And so these 7 goals roll into this goal, and then at that level, the other 4 goals roll into this goal. Yeah. And then the CEO would have like 15 or 20 goals. And so there was kind of a watered down effect of like, yeah, but my goal rolls into this bigger goal. So
the guy doesn't really know. He's not tracking it.
Just, it felt different, I guess, in terms of day-to-day operation.
Yeah. And what's the thing in the last, say, 2 years, what's been the thing that you have learned through whatever method, I don't really care, but you've learned it and then actually applied it to your company?
Yeah.
Something you're like, this is something we do.
Yeah, I'll talk about 2 of the values we have. One of them is fall in love with a problem you're working on, not the solution you came up with. And so I'll give an example of this, and I feel bad. I'm going to pick on another product real quick, and it's not, I think that this product's going in the right direction. But think about reviews at Amazon, right? The reviews team at Amazon originally they were solving the problem of how do I have confidence, how do I give my customers confidence to buy? Sure. So the problem was customer confidence, or I can't talk to a sales rep, or I can't touch and feel this thing before I buy it. So how do I get past that? Well, customer confidence comes from validation via other customers, social proof, right? And ratings, things like that. And that was the problem they were solving. And then they came up with the reviews as the solution. But then they called the team reviews. And then everyone they ever hired from there on out was hired to the reviews team. And so every goal they set was, how do we make reviews go up into the right? And more reviews in more countries on more platforms with higher quality and less fraud and everything like that. Reviews are incredibly valuable, right? One of the most innovative and amazing things Amazon did was bring reviews to sort of retail. Yeah. But it also limited the ability to think about how to solve that problem. And so if you forget about the problem you're originally solving and you focus on improving the solution, you may actually miss like 5 other amazing opportunities. So then Amazon went back to the problem, and now you have things like ask a question on a product for Amazon and get an answer from another customer. Yeah. That came out of this discussion, right? other similar things like fit, like how do I see if the clothes fit me or not? Does this run big, run small? Those sorts of things came out of revisiting the problem of customer confidence, and those all happened in the last few years. And that is something I'm taking to heart at Convoy. Every time we're working on product and process, we need to remember, and it's important for people in the company to push back and say, I think we're too obsessed with this solution right now.
Sure. Let's go
What
back.
was the problem you started with?
Yeah.
And if you, like, I want people to ask me that. If I'm like going down on some solution, like, Dan, what was the problem? Are you sure this solves the problem? And I think we're doing okay. Like, we need to make that more of the culture. It's hard to build these things in the culture, but like that is something that's super important.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's great. That's actually quite good. Good for you. I mean, seriously. I mean, I hear a lot of stuff sometimes, but that's quite good. Pat yourself
Maybe I
on the
should
back
keep
or
this
something.
job for a while.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You should keep this job for a while. What was your biggest fear when you started Convoy?
My biggest fear is that nobody would ever use it to ship a product. I had that fear up until we had the first product, or the first
customer?
shipment. Yeah. It was actually our first customer is a company called Guided Products. I'll actually give them a little plug because they're great. If you're ever ordering anything that's printed, off supplies, whatever, they're down in Kent. They do a fantastic job. You can order it online. But they were, they were our very first customer, and they were shipping, I think, a couple pallets of paper, printed, paper materials between their facility and another facility in the greater Puget Sound region. And until that moment, I think we spent 4 months building the product. We got the engineering team together April, May, and then built the MVP to launch with customers in the end of August and beginning of September. And until we actually had that first shipment, I just was like, man, what if nobody ever uses this?
Exactly. Yeah.
Built the whole thing, and then everyone's gonna look at it and say, I got a truck. I'm pretty happy. I don't need this.
Yeah.
And everybody else lied to me along the way that they needed it. So that was my biggest fear.
What's been your biggest mistake so far? I say so far because you'll make another one.
Yeah.
Awful quiet in here.
Thinking. I think probably our biggest mistake, I should have a good answer because I've already been asked this question twice today.
Have you?
I think the biggest mistake one of the things I would do differently, let me say it that way, because it's hard to, in hindsight, it's hard to know, actually I'll give a really clean example, then I'll tell one that's a little bit more ambiguous. Really clean one was, we assumed we could give drivers phones.
Give them phones.
Yeah. Turns out that you can't just give drivers phones because they don't, unlike, we thought Uber gave drivers phones, so why don't we give drivers phones? And when we first started this, it was maybe 80-ish, 85% of truck drivers had smartphones. It's actually much higher now, so the problem's pretty much solved. But we built only for Android initially. We didn't build for iOS. We're trying to get out to the market as fast as possible, and most of the drivers we talked to had Android phones. Yeah. So we said, if you have an iPhone, we'll just give you an Android phone until we build an iPhone app. And an Uber driver is always focused on their phone 100% of the time, right? They're either doing a job right now or they're waiting for the next job, and they turn it off and they're done working. Yeah. Whereas a trucker is doing a job right now, but getting a notification for a job that starts tomorrow from Convoy, right? So they're going to use their whatever phone they already have to have phone calls with their manager and their dispatcher as a default, and they're not going to look at the other phone till the end of the day because it's not real time, right? So Uber's real time, we're not real time in terms of most of the jobs we do. So I think that actually, if we'd had the insight earlier, it would have saved us a little bit of energy. We were able to recover pretty quickly by building an iOS app really quickly after we realized this, but that was it was very not obvious up front to us, and we almost went down the wrong path of investing in the wrong things from an engineering perspective that we had to then shift over and do iOS quickly. So that was a very specific, we actually did the wrong thing at first, the wrong strategy, we fixed it. I think the second thing, which is more ambiguous, is I probably would have, I don't know if I would have built every piece. So we actually were pretty, for example, when we have an app for truck drivers and carriers, trucking companies, and we have a web experience for shippers. We didn't go build a web experience for trucking companies, and we didn't build an app for shippers. We could have built one for either because they both wanted both. Sure. But one was much more relevant. So our MVP included one of each, right?
Yeah.
And we did the other stuff on the back end. I may have even, for the MVP, done less. Like really, like just picked one thing to automate and to build with technology, and then done that one, maybe just the carrier experience, and done everything else manually.
Oh, okay.
And it's something that I kind of knew going in, because I had a background in machine learning. And machine learning, when you're trying to build something, you want to use humans first. Like you do it with humans first, figure out the use case, the scenario, then build it with technology, so you get it right. It's very similar here, and I think that it's just advice for anybody who's going out and looking to build a company is it's completely okay to use manual solutions to a problem up front to make sure you've nailed the scenarios, and to not fragment your management bandwidth and your engineering bandwidth across too many problems at once. So pick, if let's say there are 5 things that have to happen for your transaction to occur, or whatever it is. Figure out the 2 maybe that are the most important and build those really well up front if you can get away with it, and do the other ones manually. And therefore, you'll probably have a really good solution to that first one before you then go build everything else. You'll learn a lot before you invest the time and energy in building the software.
Yeah, do things behind the curtain, so to speak. That's really quite helpful, especially at the MVP stage, because you'll screw it up anyway. It's going to be wrong if you
exactly
until you get a lot of iterations.
Yeah, actually, one of the engineers, Alex on our team, he when we were building, we did it fast. It was 4 months to build our MVP, so it was like they worked really hard and got it done. But I remember he came to me and was like, let's just get this out the door so we can figure out what the hell we should actually be building.
Sure, exactly.
We don't even know we're building yet. Let's get this out the door, and then we'll go build the right thing.
Yeah.
Turned out it was actually the right thing. He's a smart guy.
Yeah, he's a smart guy.
Turned out I think we're really fortunate in that the thing we built was end-to-end. We built the whole experience with technology in a self-service and automated way.
Yeah.
And then it worked. So that's why, 2.5 months later, we were able to go do the fundraise.
Yeah, part of it was because you'd done so much research up front.
I think we'd done a lot of research, but we could have, we did a lot of research. It lowered the risk.
Yeah.
There was still risk.
Yeah, exactly. If I asked your wife what's your biggest mistake, what would she tell me? Same thing?
She probably wouldn't talk about the iOS versus Android trade-off. Maybe she would. Just give me a look. Yeah, I think
there's no been personnel mistakes that cost you. None of those.
You mean just hiring?
Like hiring the wrong person.
We've done that. Yeah, and it's tough. I mean, obviously, I think we were just this actually happened recently, where we had somebody go and we had the conversation I want to have, and what we've been talking about is we shouldn't just look at that as something that happened and that will happen again. It will. Sure. But we should look at it as we need to get better. Like that means we weren't thinking about everything correctly, and we made a mistake at some point along the way, or there was something that went wrong, and let's really understand what happened so that either we hire differently in the future, or we develop differently, or we set up something differently so we can make sure it doesn't happen again. And so I think it is important in a startup to always move quickly and make decisions quickly, and you do, obviously not everyone's going to work out long term because the companies are shifting and people shift.
Yeah.
So that's necessary, but it doesn't mean it's like this inevitability that you should just live with. You should actually try to get better and reduce it in the future.
Yeah.
Because it's painful no matter what.
Yeah, I mean, when you're 10 person, 20 person, even 30 person, and you have 1 or 2 bad hires, that's a big deal. I mean, because it affects the team.
Yeah. That's right. I mean, there are a couple other things that are things I would do differently as well that I actually don't want to share because I think they're really fundamental insights to this business.
Sure.
That I've since corrected, but I don't necessarily want to say, hey, everybody, go correct these things that you're doing wrong.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Or that you should maybe think about for your next thing you do. So I'll come back to that later.
Yeah, exactly. What do you think is the one of the keys to that work backwards process you use to get investors, which is probably not a normal thing for most people, at least doing that process. What do you think was kind of some of the keys to getting that investment? I mean, because you had a rock star. You got a rock star team that put money into it. So something that said, one, obviously the problem's a big problem, but two, something about you and your team, right? So what are those things that you could share and maybe help someone else be smart at in the raising money process that maybe, sure, having Hattie as an initial guy is great help. But what are some things that you could share that helped you get, one, amazing investors, but two, attract other amazing investors? Because you can get one amazing investor, but when you get 4 or 5, I mean, there's something's going right. And do you know what it is, or is it just because there is some luck too? I know that, but
yeah, it's hard to really dissect it completely. Yeah. So that was our seed round. Like we, have Guerilla and Reid Hoffman and Simon Rothman are also amazing investors that came in for our A, but I think you're referring more to the seed round where it was a lot of angel investors. Here's what I learned from that. There is, it's the network and the relationships help.
Sure.
And that was powder I saved up for a long time. Like I was working on making sure that we could put together the right team to go raise money, and I'll talk about that in a second. Internal consistency. Storytelling and internal consistency were two of the most important things that I came away with, which is, I think you probably all heard this before, but if you're raising money, telling a story is really important.
Absolutely
right?
critical.
It's everything. Like the whole deck needs to be a story. And the deck doesn't need to be super detailed at that phase when you're raising a seed round. It really needs to be the story. And you need to be able to tell the story and not look at your slides and the slide should be the background and you're telling a story to the person you're talking to and you're looking at them and telling them this story, right?
And I just want to point out, they don't remember anything but the story.
That's right.
Just remember when you're pitching people, they don't remember your facts and figures. They remember the story.
They remember if you're passionate.
Yeah.
They remember how energetic you are.
Yep.
And then they remember, the story. Yeah. So the deck we had was really good, I think. It was actually, we got really good feedback on it. Let me say that. We got really good feedback on it. And there were a couple of particular ways we represented the industry and the story that were really, I think, unique ways to represent it. But the deck was constructed as a way for me to tell a story. And so that was really important. And then it was internal consistency, which is, if I'm saying I'm going to go do something, and the story basically tells this, the story says this is the problem in the world that we need to go solve, and here's how we're going to go solve it, right? And then the internal consistency is that you can immediately go to here's how I'm going to do it. And that was the anecdotes and the team.
Yeah.
And so when it came to the team, and this was really well, we thought through this a lot. We basically assumed that if we're going to go raise that angel round, there are 3 things that really matter. One is the person you're speaking with has to believe that you are passionate about it, you're committed to it, which means you're not working anywhere else right now, you're committed to it, you're going to do it. This isn't like you're trying to get their money and then decide to do it, you're already doing it.
Yeah.
If they don't think you're already doing it, it's really hard. So one is just commitment and passion that you're going to go do it. And then they're going to believe in you because they're going to get excited about it, the conversation with you. That was one. 2 is the opportunity obviously matters. Like the person has to believe this is a credible opportunity. Now, most of the people you're going to talk to are not experts in the thing you're doing.
Sure.
So that's where the story comes in and helping them understand and getting them there. But they need to believe it's a credible opportunity. A lot of people I've talked to about founding companies do the first pretty well. Like they'll come up with a great story, they'll quit their job and they'll go after it.
Sure.
And then they'll have an idea that seems pretty compelling. What's hard often is, can you go do it? Do you have 4 engineers or 2 engineers committed and working on this right now with you? Or if I give you the money, is there now risk you're never going to be able to go hire the team to deliver on this?
Sure.
And so I think, how do you de-risk that third one? You de-risk it through getting people active and involved in it early on. And the way that we did that with Convoy was we did the homework. I have a guy on my team that's always like, A players do their homework. He says it all the time. And it's so true. We went and did the homework. We spent, we were in the field. We got all the data and the numbers and whatever we could do, a ton of online research to come up with that story. So that I'm not just selling investors. I'm selling other people who want to quit their jobs and come do this with me. Employees and people who want to maybe give me half their time to kind of help me get off the ground. We had 5 or 6 people working on this who were engineers and helping us with it when we went to go raise money. Yeah. That was the thing that made all the difference. The other stuff I mentioned is super important. Having the engineering team doing it and committed and like their names on a slide and their pictures and like them willing to be references changed it. So that was pretty big. The last thing I'll say, in case this is helpful for folks. it depends on the time of when it is. There's different cycles, right? Investors get excited about different types of companies at different cycles. I think for a long time everybody's excited about social networking and messaging, and then I've seen a cycle right now which is, logistics is obviously really popular, and so that's great, that helped us.
Sure.
But there's another angle on it, which is this a linear business or a nonlinear business? Is this a binary business or is this a business that has sort of a gradient? And what I mean by that is there are a lot of businesses that really aren't going to be successful unless they're massive, unless they really nail it. Like gaming is one of the ones that kind of falls into that department. Messaging and social networking, certain sorts of networks are really hard to even ever get off the ground without getting to scale.
Yeah.
Whereas there are other businesses that are much more linear and effort, and I think they're less risky. So you can put in an amount of effort and expect some level of return in a certain type of business way more than others. So trucking, for example, and logistics, I felt like it was less risky because I felt like we could put the energy in and do the homework and really come up with the right approach to it and then work hard to make it happen versus having to kind of get lucky a little bit and somehow get that spark going that causes like viral downloads of our game, right?
Sure.
And so being able to compare and contrast that difference to an investor and say, look at this business, it's a linear model, it's gonna happen, technology is driving this. Because I mentioned earlier, a lot of them don't know the industry. They don't know necessarily social networking versus gaming versus trucking.
Sure.
But being able to tell that story again differentiated it from a bunch of other investments they may have been considering or could do. It made it feel like the safer bet and the smarter bet. So I think if you can tie your business to that, not like this can be successful through effort and through like thoughtfulness versus
A little luck.
having to get luck and like massive scale. You don't see a lot of like mid-sized social networks like Path, right?
Yeah.
Kind of was medium-sized.
Yeah.
And it's done.
It's done.
It has to be massive or it doesn't really go
Well,
anywhere.
like you say, those two-sided marketplaces are really tough because you got lots of people. You got to get on both sides, or
Especially in consumer.
yeah,
That's right, yeah.
yeah, they're brutal. There's got to be a little luck there. Questions and just one other question. So get ready. What was I going to ask? There was one question you made me think of. When you had the idea, when you decided, hey, this is the one I'm going to go after, what was your next thought? Was your next thought like, how the hell am I going to raise money? Or was it, how am I going to find a team? Or is it what was your thought after it's like, okay, here's my thing, here's my idea, I want to go after this. What was your next thought like, this is what I got to get done and this scares the crap out of me?
Yeah, it was.
And sorry, I have to interrupt here. And did you choose Grant, or you already knew you wanted to work with him? Was it like, I'm like, if you and I had the idea, it was like we were going to get Grant.
We had already been working on. We were working on both of those together.
Okay.
Yeah.
So he was already on the team.
That's right.
Okay.
And so we were both. I quit Amazon a little bit earlier.
Sure. But you already had some technical
We had already
chops.
talked about how we wanted to go build a company.
Yeah. Okay.
And so, and that was part of. Actually, the funny thing is, last time I kind of saying the story of getting there was I started like on the other end of the spectrum. Like I loved technology growing up. I had a computer when I was 10. I was building websites in college. Didn't mean I was a software engineer by any means. And I started in management consulting. So you can imagine the normal engineering crew's impression of management consulting is very different from someone who comes from engineering.
Sure.
So I made a bunch of moves over different companies to work my way back towards the engineering side of the house. Quitting, going to a startup where I was in business development, but that gave me some startup credibility, which allowed me to go into a product management role, which let me move into go to a startup where I could then work directly with product and engineering, which then let me go into a role where I managed engineering and product. Like 5 or 6 roles later, I finally got to a place where I felt like I was in a place where I could now have credibility on the engineering side to go, work with a co-founder who trusts me to know what I was doing, and then also be able to hire engineers. So that was like a long play to get from management consulting back to technology.
Yeah.
So Grant and I though were working on it together.
That helps a lot.
Yeah.
I mean, just helps out having some technology, somebody deep in technology that already.
That's right. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Questions? Go ahead, Emery.
Do you see any, or have you experienced any problems with investors? A lot of people typically feel like investors are always a benefit, but is there any
So the question is, have you felt any downside to having investors? Because there, it does
versus
happen.
bootstrapping or something like that.
Versus bootstrapping. Or did you even consider it? Did you even consider?
We didn't consider bootstrapping.
Yeah, you couldn't do that.
The reason is that, so we looked at this business as, hey, technology just shifted. Truck drivers didn't have smartphones 2 years ago, or most of them didn't. Maybe some did, but there wasn't enough penetration to really assume that everybody had it. And data plans, weren't pervasive enough, and GPS wasn't accurate enough everywhere. Just even a few years ago, right? And especially in rural areas and on roads. Because technology allowed that to happen, it actually, in our business, it's going to fundamentally change the way the entire business can be constructed. And so we believed that there was a window of opportunity to go after this industry. And I think we timed it really well. Timing is a huge part of any startup, but I think we timed it well. And so when we recognized the timing was right, and this was a massive industry with a window that had just opened where technology was going to allow disruptors to come and take the market away potentially from incumbents, speed was prevalent, was a huge part of that. We wanted to get to market in any sort of marketplace type business, getting to market quickly in that there's an early adopter, first mover advantage to building the marketplace. And so because of that, we basically thought time equals money. To accelerate us getting to market and getting there faster, because the market opportunity is so large, let's raise money and accelerate the pace of what we're doing. So we didn't consider bootstrapping because we thought the path to get there would take too long, and the dynamics of this particular business and this opportunity were such that speed was super important. And so we decided to go the fundraising route. To your question of is it hard to work with investors, I haven't found it to be hard to work with investors, but I think that you got to pick the right investors. You have to actually. It's dating. When you meet the person, you really want to actually enjoy the conversation you have with them and feel like there's some natural relationship and chemistry there, because you're in the best of times when you're raising money from them for the first time, right? Someday when it isn't so easy, you're gonna, having that chemistry or being able to have an open conversation is gonna be really important. So be careful about who you bring on from that perspective, because it only gets harder from the time they're signing that first check in terms of, that's one of the best moments you're probably even gonna have. It's gonna get harder at some point. And then maybe it'll be really great someday again when you have the payoff. But yeah, definitely I would be really careful about that.
Next question. Right here.
Where do you start with your work back plan? How do you decide what milestones you need to hit in order to get that round?
So this is the Series A, where we really had a really clear work back. The original seed was just, I got to get the engineering team on board, and I got to do some research and get the story together and come up with a really compelling storyline and deck. The work back plan was, it really started with the story again. What is the story you want to go tell at Series A? Actually, some of the best advice I got, even when we were raising our Series A, as soon as we were done, some of our investors, when I was talking about it, they said, write your Series B deck right now. If you believe you're going to do a Series B, you may never do it. We probably will, but go write your Series B deck. And so after the seed round, we kind of went and said, what does our Series A deck need to look like? What does that story need to be? So, what do I think it needs to be today, at least? And when we thought about it, it had a lot to do with demonstrating things like working with customers in various categories, so we could have an opinion about which category might be the best one to go after, right? Having enough volume running through our system where we could actually at least credibly believe that, at least credibly understand that we knew all the different permutations of types of shipments we'd have to deal with within the scope of what we're going after. And we kind of wrote this, the story we're going to tell is going to be the story of how we understand these things. And based on understanding those things, the money will allow us to accelerate in these areas where we believe we understand some things, and it will allow us to learn in these other areas where we don't. And a Series A is very much a venture deal, right? This isn't a financial deal. This isn't here's the formula and it produces cash. There's risk. It's a high risk deal. So we weren't trying to come up with the financial model that we could basically say, this is how your $1 will turn into $2 exactly like this. We were trying to say, this is why we believe this is the right business to go in. Here's the data we have, and here's what we need to go learn. And and then the storyline would play into that. So we actually wrote the story and then worked back from that. And that involved a certain level of volume, certain diversity of customers, being in a specific territory where we wanted to be, having a team together. I actually drew a grid. It was like a 2x2. I was like, I need to have people who understand, the demand side of the business in a marketplace, the supply part of the business in the marketplace, really understand marketplace dynamics and really understand the trucking industry, even though we had some of that. And it was like, I'm going to hire against this. And I took every person I was speaking with during my recruiting during the summer when we were building the product. I was trying to get the operations team built in parallel. So when we went to launch in September, we'd have that already. And we wrote everyone's name that we were recruiting on that sheet. It was a 2x2. And I was like, I need to make sure that I have folks who can really help me be credible in these areas I don't have as much experience in. Not only because I think that'll help the business succeed, but I can't go tell a great story if I don't have the person that could take me to the next level in those areas. So part of it is, hey, I have the people in place now, so when we go to that next level, we're ready to do that, and we can hire that next wave. And so a lot of it was, how do you write the story down right now for whatever your next raise is.
Yeah.
Couple of questions, but you can pick one or both. First one, how did you adapt Amazon processes? You talked about FAQ or signing process. How did you adapt that to startup speed and startup uncertainty? Second question being, how did you come up with your core values? What drove that, and how have those core values evolved?
Which question do you want to know the answer to?
Either. I mean, second one preferably, but you can pick.
Okay, so how did you
How
put
did
the
you come up with the
core values?
and how have they evolved?
Yeah.
You mean like the company values, like who we are as a business and who we are as a culture. We, about a year into it, we first started the company, the first 5 engineers and me and Grant went to like a retreat for a weekend. This is week 1, just to kind of talk about who we wanted to be as a company. And we started thinking about values and goals, and we kind of said, we don't know who we are yet, right? We paused that. And then a year later, we came back to it and said, what allowed us to achieve these things? What are the things that we actually talked to a lot of people in the company about it, and like, what are the things that we are already doing that we like and we want to keep doing and that we can see, because we can see everybody, like 30 people or whatever, at that period, I can't remember, I think it was about 30 people. And like, we can see end to end at this point. We can talk to everybody. Let's really figure out what really is valuable to us. And so we started to just write that down. And that became the set of values that we have. One of them was the fall in love with problems, not solutions. It's like a mindset where we think about product development and process improvement. Another one, I'll give you one other example of a value we think is pretty important, is know why. And there's a whole longer conversation we can have about culture and values and why you have them. It's not just to have them, there's a reason. The things we try to set are the things that make people super passionate about what they're doing. Right? Imagine, like any job you've ever had, especially if you've been in a big company, some people are super engaged and passionate about what they're doing, and they're 2 to 10x more valuable than people who are not like that, right? Some people are just there to get paid and invest, whatever it is. If Microsoft could, let's say 10% of their employees are like the super passionate employees. Let's say they could get that to 15% from 10%. That would probably be transformational for their level of productivity as a business. If they had these like die-hard 15% versus 10%. So how do you, I think about it that way, like what do you need to set up in your company that makes it so that as we get bigger, we can have the most people that are just die-hard fans and passionate what they do at work every day and about this business. And so know why is one of the things that plays into that, because I don't think you can exercise independent judgment, and you can't go off script, and you can't handle exceptions and things like that if you don't know why you're doing something. So I never want to have a culture where people are like, well, we're doing because Dan said so, right? It should be, well, why? Because if you don't know why and something changes and I'm not there or something's not there, you're stuck. And I think also just being happy and like feeling fulfilled in the work you're doing, being able to use independent judgment and kind of feel like you're driving the outcome based on understanding the reason why you're doing it is super important. So know why is another value that came out of this looking who we were as a business. And so we have some of these other values that are in the same category. And that's, I think, I hope is going to be a big part of kind of how we maintain our bar in terms of execution as a company and like the culture we have.
Go ahead.
So I really like the idea of working back from the Series A story that you built out. So I'm kind of curious for Convoy, what's the Series B story?
So his question is, what's the Series B story? Can you even? I don't know.
Probably not. I'm not going to share the Series B story
I was
right now.
going to say I want to share that one.
I'll say we're well on our way. We're a very different company than we were when we raised our Series A, and we're operating at a much larger scope at this point than we were. And so it's really about validation, I think, and the Series B story really is about, hey, there's a lot more validation there. So how do we really take this company to the next level and start scaling it?
One last question. Right there.
So you talked a fair bit about sort of doing in the trends researches, talking to truckers or talking to students. I'm curious how you turn that into having a larger sense of the industry and doing research into the holistic trucking industry as a whole and other players, competitors. How you thought about all those other factors that go into making a successful business?
So, repeat that. How do you?
What I heard was you went and did a bunch of guerrilla research and just talked to a bunch of people. How did that translate into the insights you need to understand, like, a business that you're going to go start? Like,
Okay.
how did I translate that into what I'm going to actually go do?
Okay, I got you.
Right?
Okay. Yeah.
So great question. And this is going to sound super cheesy. I did this a long time ago. I actually wrote a Quora post about how to think of a startup idea that got like a ton of, it got like broadcasted in different publications and stuff. So some of this stuff, it's probably dated, but some of this might be in there. But some of what I was thinking about is, okay, I actually did a bunch of research first, right? I went on the internet and learned everything I could about it. And I read every report and read about our competitors and really thought about what are the businesses. And then I forced myself to basically write down, like, who are the customers, who are all the different customer options, right? What are the things they're buying today? Like, who are the players in the industry, like the drivers, the shippers, the other brokers, or transportation companies? What do they pay money for today? They pay money for trucks, they pay money for software, they pay money for advice, like whatever, all the different things they get paid money for. And then we kind of came up with combinations of those that seemed like the most interesting, and then wrote actual like paragraph or two. This is a summary of what that business would be. So we will do this for this customer, almost like a user story in software development. Like for, as a user, I want this. So we wrote that for a couple different business ideas based on online research. And then that when you go have the conversation in the field, you want to at least go in with some sense of what you're talking about. So the questions you're asking and the type of people you're going and talking to and what you're listening for relates to that, right, in some way. You can be completely open-ended, but it can be really daunting. So we got it kind of narrowed a little bit and then went and had those conversations. And so then that was really about validation and adjustment of these ideas. And so it didn't turn out to be any of the things we wrote down, but there were actually 3 distinct businesses we came up with within trucking, and then we picked one of those 3. And they were very different. And that came from talking to a lot of people in the industry and figuring out where people actually needed something versus where we thought they did.
Are we good? No. Well, first of all, thank you very much for being here.
Yeah, thank you.
'Cause I know
Thank you everybody for coming.
Yeah.
Super honored.